Hello, welcome everyone to Global Public Affairs exclusive webinar series, Insight to Impact. I'm Hannah Thibedeau. I guess you know how the election turned out in Ontario last night. It was only minutes after polls closed that they called Doug Ford's third majority government. And here's the thing, he called it early. It's a majority government. The Conservatives have the majority government. The official opposition remains the NDP. The Greens keep 2 seats. The difference is the Liberals now have official party status, but their leader does not have a seat in the legislature. To dig into all of this with us, joining me now is the team from Global Public Affairs. You see them there on the screen. I want to get into this right away because we have an hour. We have a lot of great experts here. I'll introduce them as we go through some of these questions. But just to remind people who are there, if you have questions as well, you can put them in on the side and we will get to your questions too. So feel free to join in. But first, Rick, let's start with you. So another majority for the progressive conservative government here. You were a former chief of staff to Doug Ford. Tell us your thoughts on the outcome last night.
Yeah, pretty historic. Three majority governments in a row in Ontario is quite an achievement. For the progressive conservatives who had been in the wilderness for the better part of a decade and a half during the Liberal years, it's a great achievement. I think people will be looking at the results and wondering what's changed in the course of an election. But I think the ultimate goal of the campaign was to create a little bit of runway for Doug Ford, knowing that there's going to be a federal election at some point in 2025. And he knew that he would have to carry the load of the baggage on whatever came from that federal election when he was to go to the polls in 2026. So I think the goal was not necessarily to didn't need more seats to get a majority. He had that well in hand. It was really just to kind of move the yardstick down to a place where he wouldn't have to feel any of those headwinds.
Okay, I want to bring in now Monique Smith. She, of course, well known in Ontario. She's a former Ontario cabinet minister, but was also Ontario's representative to Washington. Monique, I want to get your thoughts on this. In particular, now the Liberals do have official party status, which they must be happy about, but their leader doesn't have a seat.
That's right. Certainly. Okay, I think I'm muted.
You're okay? Not. We can hear you.
Great. I think disappointing morning for Bonnie Crombie for sure for not getting the seat, but for the Liberal Party who haven't had official party status for a number of years, this is hugely important. It gives them resources, it gives them an office, it gives them a grounding at Queen's Park. And I think that's going to play out well for the party for the next few years. I mean, let's face it, we all came out this morning seeing the results that we expected 28 days ago. I mean, people walked to the polls. Personally, I've been on a drumbeat of Democratic suppression because I feel like an election in February, which has not happened in Ontario since 1981, is just a really efficient way of suppressing the vote. I mean, 45% of Ontarians actually made it to the polls. That's a sad statement. I think the snow banks, all of that, super hard to get to the polls for a lot of people with disabilities, seniors. So not a great turnout. Didn't give Ford the supermajority that he was looking for. People were talking about 96 seats he wanted. Didn't even get the number of seats he had last time, I don't think. In the end, there's still a few that are being counted and tabulated. But for the Liberals, a good day. Party status is important, and we're thrilled to see the number of seats that we were able to elect.
I want to bring in Ted Gruetzner now. He is the Vice President of Energy here. But before we get into the energy topic, Ted, you and I were chatting a little bit beforehand about the NDP and the Greens, and you had some good points on that.
Yeah, and welcome everyone. We'll get to the energy part later because I know there's a lot of energy folks online. What struck me as a couple of things is that the Liberals picked up a lot of the popular vote, and I know you can get into where that vote actually happened and such. But they increased their popular vote to 30%, and the NDP went down. And because of first past the post, the NDP ended up with more seats, obviously. What I thought was interesting is that all my NDP friends who usually complain about first past the post election results have been very quiet this morning. The Green Party is another interesting one, only because they did have 2 seats going into this election. They came very close in Parry Sound area for a third, but Mike Shiner, their leader, has probably had a higher level of attention than a 2-seat party would normally get. So what I found in looking at some of the results is they also got in the way of a lot of other results that where they came either a close second, a distant third, but enough votes that would have changed the outcome of a number of seats. So I thought that was an interesting result from their point of view, is they have probably a disproportionate impact on what the actual results were in a number of ridings that I looked at.
Thanks, Ted. We are going to talk more about energy for sure. I want to bring in Stefanie Haas. Now, Stefanie is a health and life sciences consultant. We're going to talk health and life sciences as well, Stefanie. But let's talk about the youth vote. How did that play out here?
I think Doug Ford was so successful with the youth this time, aside from the low voter turnout, because he's been really good at using sort of gimmicky politics this time around. Putting on that hat saying not for sale, wearing that Hockey Canada jersey saying not the 51st state. Those are things that young people find amusing. And when there aren't huge policy concerns that are affecting them in a dramatic way, those are the things that they're going to latch onto and make them head to the polls. In addition to that, he's a stable kind of figure right now, and we're really lacking that federally. And I think young people just want the status quo for the moment.
Okay, let's go to John Allen. John Allen, welcome, Vice President of Infrastructure and Transportation at our Toronto office here. John Allen, let's talk about that actually. It was a major plank in transit. What do you think will be the first thing that the Doug Ford government looks at when it comes to transit?
Well, I think when you look through the platform, it did sort of resemble a Marx catalogue in many respects. I think virtually every photo seemed to have a hard hat, work boots, or a high-vis vest. So I think that's really central to their economic strategy and really sort of looking forward. They've laid out a pretty ambitious plan for infrastructure at large, 200 billion over 10 years, which is unprecedented. 70 billion of which is transit as well. So when you're looking at sort of what they're trying to achieve economically, this level of investment, the plans that they've got a number of projects underway. They've sort of dangled out this concept of Go 2.0 to sort of look at what's beyond that. But they also had sort of quite the shopping list of highway projects, which I think was interesting, of just trying to really make that link between investment in infrastructure and improvement in people's lives. So I think when you're sort of talking to people day to day, if you sort of look at the platform here, there's a lot of stuff that those local MPPs can sort of get their teeth into, saying, oh, we're expanding this highway or that bottleneck here. These are things that we're addressing, and that impacts people's daily lives. The big challenge that they've got, and it's not gone away, and there is this sort of fear it's going to get worse with the Canada-US dynamic around tariffs, is the cost of infrastructure has not gone down. Since COVID, it's really rocketed. So there was some interesting elements in there around trying to get their arms around costs, having more of a central role for organisations like Infrastructure Ontario, looking at the permitting bit, so uploading some of the municipal building responsibilities, which might be interesting going forward. Permitting, it's stuff that doesn't really get headlines, but it's important. So that's something that they really need to get their arms around, is the cost.
Yeah, we're going to talk a bit more about the tariffs right now, because Doug Ford essentially went into this election saying he wanted a stronger mandate to fight against President Donald Trump, his threat against sovereignty, his threat against tariffs. Rick Roth, let's bring you in on this. Everybody can jump in on this one too. And a reminder, if you do have questions, just type them in off to the side there. Pretty easy to do, and we'll get those questions to our panelists as well. So Rick, when it comes to the mandate being tariffs, is that what you think people were voting for at the ballot box?
Yeah, absolutely. It seemed like every other political party had a tough time cutting through on their kind of core message. I know Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals were almost solely focused on healthcare. Can we get you a family doctor, and that sort of pledge. And I don't think it's completely Doug Ford's doing. I think the media, the way it is, carries a lot of what's happening south of the border, and there's been a lot of turmoil that has flooded north. So I think he took advantage. The team obviously saw that and knew that it would be a core ballot box issue, and they were pretty disciplined in making sure that they never really strayed from that core message, even if they were talking about infrastructure or they were talking about their kind of economic plan. It was always in the context of the threat of tariffs. And yeah, I think a disciplined campaign, paid dividends in the end.
Monique, I want to bring you in on that because I would agree with Rick that it was very focused on their side, and on the opposition side, they didn't seem to really try to take that narrative away from Doug Ford. In fact, they really did focus on other issues like healthcare. And Stacey, sure, I saw you typed a question in, but I only got part of it. So if you can type the rest of the question in. Sorry, Monique, go ahead.
No problem. No, I think that the opposition, certainly the Liberals, talked about healthcare a lot. And I think in most of the polling, we saw that, cost of living, healthcare, education were top of mind for people in this election. But, kudos to them. Ford's team took full advantage of the opportunities that arose. So Trump being elected, Trump attacking Canada, Ford being the chair of the Council of the Federation, which in every other year would seem like just another chore for a premier, but he has capitalized that as being Captain Canada. The Liberal leadership federally, so we have a bit of a moving target on what's going on federally, although I think Justin Trudeau has been playing his role very safely and well as our chief defender. All of those came to play for Ford to be able to convince people that he actually has a role to play in the U.S. conflict, which he really kind of doesn't, or if he does, it's a minor role. But he did convince people that he did have a role to play and that he was the best person suited to fight Trump at this time. I think, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, people were more concerned if you actually asked them what their concerns were about healthcare, about the cost of living, about their children's education. But the narrative, and as Rick mentioned, like the public narrative, the journalism narrative was all about tariffs and Trump every single day. He does suck up all the oxygen. I'm in Washington right now. It's all anybody's talking about. So that tended to, if that's all people are hearing is Trump, tariffs, attacking Canada, and you've got one candidate who is beating a drum that says he's going to defend Canada, he's going to get the ears
and I think
and the votes.
Sorry,
obviously.
Go ahead, Rick.
I was just going to say, and I think the Ford team found that was the major differentiator between Ford and the other parties. Is there was a bigger gap on who you trust more to fight back or stand up for Donald Trump. Whereas on the topics of education and healthcare, there might have been a gap, but I think the Ford team did what they needed to do to ensure that there wasn't much of a gap between who's more trusted on each area. So, I think that obviously played a role into the result, and like Monique said, the external factors of Trump being able to put out a post on Truth Social or on X and it carry the news and get as much traction as it did, obviously played a huge impact.
Here's a great question. Sorry, who wanted to jump in? Monique?
Monique again. Sorry. I just wanted to say,
And
the
Stefanie.
polling on right track, wrong track was very clear that people thought that Ford government is on the wrong track in most of those major areas, and which made this kind of victory all the more kind of weirdly shocking, although was expected, because people aren't happy with what the government's doing on most of the services and most of the areas that are provincial jurisdiction.
Stefanie, you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on that point. Even though those were core issues for people, after looking at across the platforms, I feel like the NDP and Liberals just didn't do enough in health and education to make their platforms differentiate from each other and come out against the PCs. There are a lot of similarities on infrastructure that the PCs were already doing. making sure everybody will be connected to a primary care provider. I think that both parties could have taken a more innovative approach to be more of a stronghold on those issues compared to the incumbent.
So we do have a great question from Stacy Shore here. Stacy, thank you for that. And anyone else can put questions in as well. How real is Ford's proposal to limit electricity exports to the USA? Ted, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, it was an interesting comment that he made early on in the Trump tariff debate. There were a lot of raised eyebrows because I'm not sure anybody knew where that actually came from. And from a technical point of view and just the basic physics of exporting and the way the interconnection of the grid, it would be very, very challenging to do. Also, we trade back and forth depending on system needs. So it would also mean that we're probably not able to borrow from Michigan if we needed it, or borrow from New York if we needed it. So, but we were talking earlier, and I think he very quickly moved away from that. I know he early on got into a discussion or a debate with Daniel Smith about she should cut off oil and gas exports. He then became kind of a more broader, we have to work together. Let's look at other ways of dealing with the United States, and never really came back to it. And nobody really ever asked him again about it. So whether it's still in the back of his mind, not sure. But now that they're elected this quickly on their energy policy, their whole energy policy is based on building out a system that will allow Ontario to become what the Minister of Energy and Electrification, Stephen Lecce, has called an energy superpower. So it'll be, as we move forward now that the election's settled, it'll be interesting to see whether or not that's still part of their mantra or do they back off on that? Because it was a very clear part of their energy policy was to become this exporter of note to the United States.
Anybody else want to jump in on Stacy's question? Monique?
Yeah, so just to state the obvious, it wouldn't be a Ford decision to cut off the electricity. It would be a national decision, and so it would be the federal government that would be deciding, what are our actions with respect to retaliation on tariffs. And so it would never, just fall to one province to decide they were going to do this, because it would have to be a national coordinated response.
And I think it's fair to say that at the time he likely said that, there was a lack of leadership in that coordination. And we did see a lot of premiers out there freelancing at the time as well. Rick, did you want to jump in too?
I mean, just to say, I think he's Ford and Ford's team were very early to recognize that there is a bit of a vacuum right now in Ottawa, and probably at the wrong time when a new U.S. president is being sworn in and is threatening massive tariffs that will disrupt our own economy. So I think they saw the kind of the cards very clearly, and being a chair of the Council of Federations between the provinces, they saw an opportunity to take a leadership role. And what an unprecedented election campaign to have a sitting incumbent premier make 2 visits to Washington D.C. Probably did more visits there than he did to some small towns in Ontario. So
the north, the whole north,
the north. Maybe one visit to the north. Yeah.
So I want to go on and talk about some unprecedented things as well. That one of the things I noticed is Doug Ford won in ridings that he hasn't traditionally won in the past. One of those being Hamilton Mountain. That was an NDP riding. Sorry, I'm going to come back to you on this one too, Rick. That one, there are quite a few other ones.
Yeah, I think they picked up. They picked up Algoma, Manitoulin, another riding in the north that they were looking at. They felt. I can't remember if they actually won Algoma, Manitoulin. I think it was on their definitely on their hit list.
The Liberals got that one. I'm just looking at the list. Sorry, it's not that long after the election happened.
Yeah, there was one. I can't remember. Mantha, I think, was the MPP that they took up and took advantage of the split somewhere in the north. But yeah, Hamilton Mountain is a huge pickup, and I think it's an acknowledgement of a lot of the work that the Ford team has done, dating back to the Monty McNaughton days at Labour, kind of building relationships and building trust with private sector unions, and it was a core part of their rollout and election strategy last time, and I think it's just been enhanced this time. To a point where it seemed like almost every day there was some private sector union endorsing the PCs, and that goes a long way. They're looking for big voting blocks and big voting constituencies, and those unions carry a lot of sway. And I also think they took advantage, Hamilton Mountain, of a pretty strong three-way split. It was relatively close. I think everyone was north of 20%. But that gives them 2 ridings in Hamilton. They came relatively close in another one, and yeah, it's a very untraditional voting bloc for progressive conservatives.
Yeah.
Hamilton's
Just to jump in though, I mean, there was a couple of Liberal wins that were probably unexpected. I thought, Ajax, the Liberals, it's got to be a recount, I suspect. Winning in Ajax against an incumbent PC in a very blue area, and then the Etobicoke Lakeshore, where bike lanes were a big issue, and the Liberal there won against a cabinet minister. So, there's a lot of weird results that came out of the election that maybe you wouldn't have expected.
Monique, can you dig in a bit more about something Rick was talking about there, that how the Conservatives managed to wrap up the union vote?
Yeah, and they did it kind of individually, like local by local. They weren't going after the big kind of broad union support. They went local to local. I think a lot of it had to do with jobs. I think a lot of it, again, ties back to Trump. They were arguing that tariffs were going to hurt jobs. And so they, who's the best defender of your job? And they were able to convince at the local level, both employers and workers, that they were best suited to fight the fight. Depending on how things roll out next week, and it is next week that we're expecting the tariffs to be announced or implemented. Although I'll believe that when it happens, because it keeps changing every day. We'll see if they're able. I mean, they're going to have to fork out a lot of money to support industry through what is going to be a troubling time. And I think it'll be interesting to see if they're able to retain that support, longer term, or if the workers, the unions, will go back to their traditional support of NDP and Liberal. Over time, we've had union support as well. So clearly, this is an indication that the unions are not going to sit by party lines in the future.
Yeah, fascinating. We have a question from Paul Norris. Any comment on the PC platform messaging? This is prohibiting Chinese imports on electricity products and components. And I think, Ted, do you want to take that? You and John?
Yeah, sure. And I promise I didn't stack the audience with energy folks. But a key part of the Tory platform was basically outlining what they've done before. But a key part of this is banning any Chinese state-owned enterprise from buying or taking equity in Ontario government-funded energy, critical minerals, or major infrastructure asset. I suspect they'll probably keep it down that road. I mean, it's a big part of but in this changing geopolitical world, who knows who's going to end up being our allies and friends again. But I would say, Paul, that they will continue down that path. Where I think is from a broader perspective is, though, they're putting a lot of faith into their provincially owned utility OPG. Disclosure, I used to work there, but it wasn't all that often that OPG was such the favored child. But they've got a lot of eggs in OPG's basket in terms of infrastructure in Ontario for energy, which is a big shift over a number of years from a government perspective.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one? Okay, sorry, I see John.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think it's really been a sea change in terms of that sort of resting at Chinese investments that everywhere was sort of really looking to. But now, whether it's sort of poking the bear of Donald Trump, that allowing them in, but also the intellectual property piece, they're big players in nuclear and other markets. I think one of the things that Doug Ford mentioned last night was this pride in being the first G7 jurisdiction to get an SMR, small modular reactor, up and running. I think you're seeing a bit of more savviness, I think, when it comes to that cutting edge technology in the positions of a lot of governments now.
I want to talk to you, Stefanie, a little bit about this, because one of the biggest things is people being able to find family doctors. It's an issue, or nurse practitioner in this province. Ford is going to have to address these types of issues.
Absolutely. And I think that's going to be at the forefront within his first 100 days securing this new mandate. He's already made quite a bit of investments into securing family doctors. He's hired over 100,000 new nurses, 15,000 physicians. He's increased the amount of PSWs that we already have. So he's done quite a significant job on ensuring our workforce continues to grow. I think now he's going to be looking to find ways to utilize that resource even more. So, for example, scope of practice expansion. He's already announced that for nurse practitioners and registered nurses. In the platform, he's now added on physiotherapists. So I think people can expect that different types of healthcare providers will have more extended ways to support them. Additionally, time to access for medications will be another thing. For cancer drugs specifically, this will be through Project Orbis. So people can expect that there'll be more emphasis on getting innovative products into our market. And overall, that private sector piece will continue to play a huge role. They've had a lot of success with community and surgical diagnostic centers for minor surgeries. And I think people can expect that that is going to continue well into the future and be a part of our healthcare system delivery.
Monique, this is something
On that, Hannah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to jump in because, there was that lovely tragic scene in Walkerton where people were lined up in the snow waiting to sign up for a family doctor, and that was a real indication of the crisis that we're in, that Doug Ford has brought us to on healthcare. And they put a lot of money into their candidate in Windsor, in the Windsor area. The Tories did, thinking that with the Trump tariff argument that they had a chance in the Windsor region, and in fact the NDP held on there. I think that was also an indictment on their healthcare performance to date. I agree, it's something that they've got to take some action in and they've got to be investing in. I don't agree, though, that they'll necessarily take a lot of action in the first 100 days, because I think the first 100 days in Ford's world is going to be just sailing on this whole anti-Trump sentiment, and he will continue to play his Captain Canada role over Premier of Ontario, which sadly I think he should be playing.
I want to ask all of you this question, so think about it. And Rick, I am going to come to you first on it. What do you expect to see when the legislature comes back? And maybe for each of your expertise, we can kind of talk about that. So Rick, let's start with you, and you can go anywhere on this.
Yeah, I imagine they more or less have a budget already written, or at least top of mind. They were going through the budgeting process late in 2024, early 2025, before the election call. So can't imagine, the premier is not the type of person that's going to probably take a few weeks off. He's going to want to be seen as very active, especially in the face of tariffs, which we could see as early as next week. So I would imagine as soon as a cabinet's appointed, you'll see a speech from the throne, which I don't really think is a necessary component of it, but they could table budget relatively quickly. And I think the one thing, kind of riffing off what Stefanie said, the one thing I think is probably true is there's not going to be limitations like you may have seen in the first Doug Ford term. It's not a government that has rested everything on balancing the books. They've had to pivot during the COVID crisis and spend unprecedented amounts of money. And I have to imagine, look at their platform. There's $40 billion in new commitments to support workers and companies through possible tariffs. Money will not be a hindrance to this government, and they'll be looking to support people. So whether that's through the healthcare sector or through larger industries that maybe.
Oh, sorry, Rick. Yeah. John Allen, let's go to you next. Sorry, and then Monique, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I think one of the sort of big ways to sort of deal with economic uncertainty and potential downturns is obviously stimulus spending. The challenge that they have is really that engines are firing on all cylinders. There's not much more capacity to put more money into that and build more stuff. I mean, you look at the huge investments that they've got in transit. House building is a huge priority. Ted sort of mentioned the energy sector. The investment is going into sort of constructing all the battery facilities, battery manufacturing, automobile facilities, data centers. All these are the same people, and there's just a huge shortage. So I think the Conservatives have done a very good job. I think going back to Rick's point from Monty McNaughton, is investing in that skilled trades bit. But whether it's going to be enough, I don't know. But this is the challenge right now, is that there aren't that many sort of tools available to really mitigate the impacts of any sort of economic downturn when it comes to infrastructure, because it's all out there. It's running at warp speed already.
Monique, I want you to get in on this one as well. What do you think the Liberals will do? And I don't know if you want to answer the question now. Let's just go for it. What about Bonnie Crombie? I know she says she's staying on. Do you think she will?
Yeah, I mean, she said last night clearly that she will, so I think we have to take her at her word. It's not an easy road to hoe, to be the leader of the official opposition and not have a seat. Not the first time. I mean, John Tory was the leader of the official opposition and didn't have a seat for over a year. He would watch question period in his office and then appear in the hallway afterwards to answer questions and to speak to the media. So, I mean, there is precedent. There's a way of doing it, of making your presence known. Also gives you the opportunity to be traveling the province. You know, you can't underestimate the value of official party status. So they will have an office. They will have some staff, some resources, the ability to, you know, pull together some good pithy questions for the 14 members that will be in the House. And also to create some cohesion, because you know, it's tough for caucus to be setting up meetings when they don't have anyone to actually set up a meeting. So that, I think, will show there'll be a big shift for the Liberals, which will be great. I think for the other two parties, we'll be back to status quo. I mean, I agree with Rick. The Tories probably already have the budget printed, if not printed, at least written. May have to tweak it a bit given what's going on with tariffs. The NDP, you know, for them, I think the benefit of this election is that they might have a little bit less infighting, which will give them some cohesion. It's raised the profile of Marit Stiles provincially. You know, I commented a few times during the campaign that it was kind of shocking to me that she hadn't been able to break through prior to the election, given that she had official party status and was the leader of the official opposition for a number of years. But now people have gotten to see her a little bit more over the last 30 days and get to know her. And so I think that'll continue to increase her profile. And then with respect to Bonnie, I do think that she will probably stay on for two reasons. One, she said she was, and two, I think the Liberals, there's a general fatigue on leadership, and we're having a federal leadership. And I think, you know, in the short midterm, steady she goes, and let's get our structure in place as an official party again and keep moving forward. She talked about it as a building block, and I think that's what this election was for the Liberals.
Stefanie,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rick.
I was just gonna say, like, I think post-election is always a tough time for parties that didn't form government or maybe underperformed in expectations. I remember, I think Tim Hudak went through two election losses, and there's always going to be some discontent within the party, and I think sometimes you can weather that storm, and sometimes it'll get the best of you. So yeah, I think it's far too early to know how that's going to play out in each caucus. The NDP went through their own kind of internal turmoil with Sarah Jama, and I think they've got a bit of an identity that they need to rectify, at least internally. And I think Bonnie Crombie's not going to be without her detractors within the Liberal Party as well. The leadership was still pretty fresh, and there's still people, you know, within the tent on other sides, and they'll think that they can have done a better job. So we could see a different opposition. We could see the same two components. It really depends on how they weather the internal storms.
Ted, you wanted to jump in on this?
I don't disagree with.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Monique.
Sorry, I don't disagree with Rick, but I was the chief of staff to Dalton McGuinty in '99, so I do remember what it's like to be in opposition, to come back and not have won. But you know, the fact that you have improved your circumstances definitely holds you in good stead with a number of caucus members. So to have gotten party status, I think gives Bonnie a little bit of wind in her sails, a little bit more than coming back, you know, in the same position or further behind. So I think she's she does have that marker to point to and say, look, we're building and we've got to keep building. But
Ted?
it'll, a lot will depend on the dynamics of caucus and her own personal choice.
Ted, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of things on the energy front to watch for. I think there's going to be a lot. I mean, who becomes the minister will make a big difference, but I don't know that will substantially change where the Conservatives will go. So just to kind of emphasize for folks, I know Paul Norris from the Hydro Association is on, Water Power Association is on. A lot of focus on refurbishing and building hydroelectric when they can. Big focus on nuclear power with both BG and Bruce Power. And also a very strong commitment to natural gas. In their programs, they've identified natural gas plays a big role both in the electricity system and the home heating system, recognizing that it's like 40% of our total energy use, and we're I think we consume 25% of the natural gas in the country. So whereas most governments lately have been trying to get off of that fossil fuel, they're very bullish on the fact that fossil fuel will continue to play a role in Ontario. Both for electricity generation. The other thing I think will be interesting to watch, because it does tie into that whole energy sector, is there's a big commitment by the Ontario government and the federal government to upgrade our steel plants. So the Algoma Steel, one of the plants in the Hamilton area, have been getting off of coal and getting into arc furnaces / natural gas. But obviously, as people know, that's a big target for Donald Trump. Same with the auto sector. So how they react both in energy costs, energy availability, and also managing that whole threat to very large parts of our economy will be something to watch, and something very difficult, I think, for them to manage as we navigate the Trumpian world that we seem to have landed in.
I want to bring Stefanie into this discussion too, because Ford has hired a former Liberal cabinet minister to help reform the healthcare system, Dr. Jane Philpott. Tell us a little bit about that, Stefanie, and how we expect to see that unfold.
For sure. So I think that was a pretty good decision by Ford if he's trying to get any sort of swing voter that might have been Liberal to his side on his camp for healthcare. He even commented in his platform that he's not afraid to reach across the aisle. So I think that's something we can expect to see in the future, hopefully working positively with the other parties. Jane Philpott has a broad bandwidth of experience, and I think she'll be able to help implement things a lot faster and kind of tee up his ideas on innovation and how to utilize that within primary care. And hopefully she can address some of these shortages for physicians and maybe start allocating physicians properly to the right areas. I think that's something that's really missing right now. We have all of these initiatives to get physicians up north, and we have a bunch of people in Toronto that also don't have doctors. So I think a big part of what she'll do is matching patients with the right care or the right primary care team.
How much critique do you think Doug Ford will get, Monique, when it comes to, this is his third term and the healthcare dial hasn't seemed to be moving?
No, and in fact, the healthcare dial is decreasing. People are finding it harder to get good care. We have more Ontarians without a family physician than we've had ever, I think, in the past. The resources aren't there. He talks about training nurses, but they're not going to the nursing colleges in droves. We've got we've got an increasingly aging population. So I have lots of friends whose moms and dads are looking for care, and it's becoming increasingly challenging. So I think that there's an uphill climb there. I think, he's in a third term. He's going to have to turn the ship around on healthcare for sure in order to, sustain this legacy that he seems to have. But I think it also provides an opportunity for other parties to come up with some really great creative solutions on how we improve the healthcare system in the province.
Rick, do you think that there will be any movement, like visible movement on the dial from the Ford government when it comes to healthcare, or are they laser focused still when it comes to the tariffs and infrastructure, those types of issues?
Yeah, I think healthcare and education are always going to be shield issues for the Conservatives. I'm not sure. I think he's done a reasonably good job at keeping it at kind of keeping it not a defining issue of his tenure. I think every government struggles with it. I mean, the four Tories were elected on the promise of getting rid of hallway healthcare. I'm not suggesting things have gotten better, but it was definitely a component of their critique of the previous government. So healthcare is always going to be a challenging issue in Canada, just because it is split across a couple jurisdictions, and with the feds being a significant funding partner of it. So yeah, it'll continue to be a shield issue for the Conservatives. No doubt.
Let's talk about something that really it sort of fell off the discussion a bit. And Ted, I want to go to you first on this one, the environment, because we saw in the United States what happened when Trump took over. Is it sort of a big issue here still?
That's what I found peculiar. I jokingly said to Rick, because he was the author of the Made in Ontario Climate Change Plan when he was Chief of Staff to the Minister of Environment, that he must have solved the problem because it wasn't discussed at all. It wasn't that long ago that there was tens of thousands of people marching in every city in Canada wanting climate change action. Young folks, old folks, everywhere. Even in Calgary, it was like 50,000 people, I think. The Conservative platform didn't mention it. The Liberal Party platform, I think, mentioned it once. The NDP, their only commitment was to create a climate change youth core of something that was ill-defined. The Green Party, of course, core element for them. It was a very large part of that, but it didn't come up in the debate that I saw. It didn't come up in any of the coverage. So that broader environmental question of air quality, water quality, species at risk that often percolate around elections were not part of this. And I find it surprising. It's just like we all remember the Liberals back in 2003, for those of a certain age, got elected primarily because they promised a very large environmental commitment to close coal. And it was hugely, hugely popular. And they were going to bring in renewable energy, all sorts of stuff. And it just seems to have fallen off the table. And so it was curious to me. I mean, not surprising given everything else that's going on, but the fact that it wasn't an issue was a bit of a shocker to me, or wasn't even raised as an issue was a shocker to me. And let alone the fact that the parties didn't talk about it and nobody seemed to care that they didn't talk about it was also interesting to me.
Does anybody else want to jump in on this one? And before you do, I just want to mention, if anybody has a question, just put it in to the side there. We'll get those to our experts here, but no one else seemed to want to jump in on that. But
yeah.
Go ahead.
I would just say I think public opinion has shifted so much since we wrote the provincial environment plan after the 2018 election. At that time, the environment was probably a top 3 issue in terms of public opinion polling. And now I'd be shocked if it's in the top 5. Affordability has taken over. The debate is squarely around the carbon tax, the consumer-facing carbon tax, and it's pushed the left into uncomfortable territory, as we've seen in the federal Liberal leadership race, where we have people kind of turning against their own policy. The same thing with Bonnie Crombie and some of their candidates that were very, very pro consumer carbon tax that needed to walk that back. So yeah, I think the conversation has changed entirely.
Yeah.
And that's probably why you didn't see a whole lot of attention paid to it.
Well, in fact, sorry, but just one quick point on that. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy. It's not that I don't care about it. It's like I care about other things more. But you saw during the campaign a lot of the chatter on X from the Conservatives was Bonnie's carbon tax. She's going to bring in a carbon tax. So it's obviously still a powerful axe to tax movement out there. Also makes me wonder if you heard some interviews where people weren't sure if they were voting in a federal election or a provincial election, and often the people the news would talk to were going on about how much they had to get rid of Justin Trudeau, and that was a big chance to do this election. So, but again, I just thought it was fascinating that how much it dropped off the public sentiment.
Monique?
Yeah, just we did close those coal plants, Ted. So that was like a big environmental check mark and success for the McGuinty government, and it was a heavy lift. But I think, I think this is an interesting segue into how this election is going to impact or not in the federal realm.
You read my mind,
Monique. Talking about the carbon. There you go. Great minds think alike. Just talking about the carbon tax and trying to label Bonnie with the carbon tax, which I think is one of the big challenges that the federal conservatives have going into what is going to be an election any day on the federal side. They've spent so much time and energy in the last 2 years building a campaign around Pierre Poilievre that was axe the tax. We all know the line. And not being kind to Trudeau, I will say, as opposed to using the expletive that everyone had put in front of his name over the last couple of years on the conservative side. And now they've lost both of those arguments at the federal level. So I think they did try to kind of resurrect it a little bit on Bonnie, and it didn't go very far. So I think that too kind of reflects the lack of interest on environmental issues in this particular campaign, as well as the fact that Trump is a kind of climate change denier. So like people are kind of like moving to the next stage of, well, where's Trump at, and is this going to be an issue that we need to talk about at all? Yeah. So right. I think this you can segue into the federal side, Hannah.
Yeah, that's what Rick, what do you think? And Monique just reads my mind. What do you think this election shows for a federal election, which, let's be honest, it's going to happen in the next few weeks? I'm saying it is going to happen in the next few weeks because I think it's pretty much going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it puts a lot of pressure on Poilievre, I think. Although I feel like he's probably feeling a little more pressure than he was 3 or 4 months ago. But I warn people to draw too many contrasts between the provincial progressive conservatives and the federal conservatives. They are very different. They are very different conservatives. They have very different voting coalitions. They have very different priorities. I think most observers now would see a lot more linkages to the federal Liberals than back to the provincial progressive conservatives in terms of priority, in terms of policy position. So. I think it's the pressure's obviously on Poilievre to perform. I think his team will obviously look at the voting breakdown here in Ontario. Ontario's seat rich part of the country that always kind of predicts how elections go one way or the other. So I think there's a lot to be learned in this, but yeah, very different conservatives and tough to draw straight lines.
Stefanie, maybe I can get you to jump in on this. When it comes, and I asked this as a moderator in the Liberal leadership debate as well, that in 2015, Justin Trudeau got his majority because of a younger vote. That 18 to 35 demographic has really started to shift to the Conservatives. Do you think it will stay over there federally by looking at what you saw here, or do you think they're starting to consider other options and not just the Liberals, maybe the NDP or the Greens?
I think we're going to have something similar to what happened in the US election. You're going to see a lot of a greater proportion of male voters voting for Republican or Conservative, in Canada Conservative. You're going to see a large copycat moment of that here. I think there's going to be a lot more females than people expect that are young that will vote for the Conservatives, because the federal messaging for Liberals just hasn't really stuck or aligned. I think there's a lot of people that I know personally who are still pretty hardline Liberal, regardless of their shortcomings in the past few years. And I think the young vote is going to be very active. Pierre's been really, really strong at using social media to his advantage, especially when Justin Trudeau was in the legislature. That clickbait of him being able to debate him into the ground worked very well for him. Now, if there's going to be a Carney in power, that could definitely impact things. And young people do place trust in Carney because of his wealth of experience. But I think Pierre's really good at targeting the core issues and coming from a more personal perspective than Mark Carney could, as somebody who is obviously very extremely wealthy and sort of an insider. And I think now young people don't want an insider. They want somebody that really gets what they're going through and can communicate to them in a really digestible manner.
John Allen, let me bring you in just on the issue. We saw Justin Trudeau announce the high-speed rail, in particular, these legacy type projects, nation-building type projects. Do we expect to see more of those announced or thought of in the future? And will this one even happen?
Yeah, so I heard a good analogy that basically when you're investing in infrastructure, it's sort of building muscle for the economy, whereas sort of tax cuts are a bit of a sugar rush. So, when we're looking at, and these conversations are always cyclical, but there's always been this sort of talk about diversifying the economy from the US, the reliance on trade with the US. To do that, there needs to be a big investment in the port infrastructure, getting them more efficient, sort of looking at sort of how do we unlock resources. There was talk of the Ring of Fire in the platforms, and it's sort of a bit of the sort of zombie project that sort of resurfaces every election. But I think the dynamic has changed a bit now just because of this US push for critical minerals. We see that in their sort of dialogue with Ukraine, that they're desperate to sort of unlock that Chinese stranglehold on it. And we have seen that sort of a pretty smart approach across the country of really getting Indigenous communities to be part of those projects as equity partners now. So whereas those approvals would take a lot longer, now they're really being powered by the Indigenous communities who are benefiting from them. So I think we are in a little bit of a sort of change in some of those projects that were perhaps mothballed, seem to be destined never to happen. We could see a fair bit of money and a bit of Indigenous backing really unlock a lot of that.
We are getting close to the top of the clock, but don't leave yet, because I'm going to give everybody a chance to give their final thoughts on this Ontario election. And Ted, I'm going to start with you on this one. You can go anywhere with this. When you saw about 9 minutes after, polls closed, that it was going to be another majority, where do you see things going here and now?
Well, from I think it was like 6 minutes on one channel I was watching, but it wasn't. I think I think the point has been made. It wasn't a surprise. So it was kind of confirming what we already thought was going to happen anyway. And then the question was who came second or third. I think from an energy perspective and a resource perspective, there's always kind of comfort in status quo. I think if you've been involved in the energy sector or looking at the energy sector in Ontario, you've seen a progression of the Ontario government evolving into where they want to be. There won't be any major changes, so you can just move on, pick up where you were before in terms of engagement, project planning, purchasing, all that sort of thing that you may have been involved in. So I don't see any major changes. So from an energy sector, I think they should take comfort in the fact that things are going to stay the same.
John Allen, infrastructure and transportation?
I think it goes back to the cost piece, that it's such a central part of what they're trying to do. And the cost rises that we've seen in terms of building stuff now, it's virtually doubled since 2018. So we are seeing that sort of focus on getting the house in order, and quite often what you see with new governments when they get elected, and certainly the Conservatives were no exception, sort of back when they were first elected, that there's this huge list of sort of Oprah Winfrey type, you get an LRT, you get a hospital, and everybody gets projects. And then the reality hits over time that as the cost ticks up, they run into issues, they run into delays, that they really sort of have to sort of figure out the mechanics of, the less glamorous things of sort of procurement, contracting, that sort of stuff. That they're looking at technology to play a bigger role around their sort of planning and delivery, digital twins, that sort of thing. So I think it's really trying to get their house in order when it comes to construction and getting more bang for the buck.
Stefanie, let's talk health and life sciences.
I think if you're in the health and life sciences industry, this is definitely a win for the sector. Kind of echoing what Ted said, it's always good when there's a status quo, especially when you have a government like this that has taken a keen interest in supporting health and life sciences through innovation and manufacturing and tech and all of those sectors. Phase 2 of the life sciences strategy is still going to be going on. with his announcement on speeding up time to listing by 6 months. That's huge, even though it's just for oncology medicines to start. That gives an entry point for a rare disease company or another innovator in the space to be able to have conversations with government and find innovative ways to partner with them. So I think this is just a great way to have the door open if you're in that sector and continue to build relationships with existing people in the government and in the political world.
Monique, you're next.
I'm going to take it on a different slant. I think the results of this election are going to be a challenge for Pierre Poilievre at the federal level. I think, if Doug Ford decides to continue on as Captain Canada, there's not a lot of room on the right for too many kings. I think, we've got this historic thing, which I don't really buy into, but people talk about all the time, that we have a different party at the federal and the provincial level. Doug Ford wanted to get his election underway before the federal election so that he could solidify his place, and he has done that. So does that leave the door open for the Liberals to continue to rule at the federal level? That's the big question. I think it's created a void, or it's proven that there is a void on this axe the tax argument. It didn't stick to Bonnie Crombie. It's not going to stick to the federal Liberals because they're moving away from the carbon tax. And so Pierre Poilievre, who spent the last 2 years really honing his campaign around that message, is going to have to look for a new message, and he's going to have to struggle with a division within his own party between those who support Trump and those who support, being pro-Canada. So he's going to have some major challenges. I think there's also going to be the challenge of Pierre Poilievre, career politician, staffer before he was elected, so really no real life experience, and probably Mark Carney, who's got a huge amount of life experience and I think within the Canadian perspective, best suited to stand up to Trump. So I just think that the Ford election does kind of feed into where we are federally, and I think it'll be interesting to watch the next few weeks.
And because Rick Roth was the former chief of staff in the Ford government, I'm going to give you the final say today. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I remember my first few weeks as a chief of staff. Any sort of change of government is very unsettling for stakeholders, and from an engagement perspective. So certainty is obviously a good thing for those who kind of work in the Ontario government space. Provides a ton of runway that will hopefully see through an entire 4 years of the Trump presidency. We'll see through the bulk of the next federal administration. So it's a good time to engage in Ontario, but it's also it provides some certainty for the opposition parties to really define what the next election is going to be about, define that change message.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This is just a sampling of the experts we have in our office. Global Public Affairs, of course, is Canada's leading government relations and public affairs firm. And I want to just reiterate something, that it's not just in Ontario. We are right across the country. And recently, we, of course, made waves in the Atlantic with the acquisition of M5 Public Affairs. So we are now coast to coast. If you need any form of assistance, you saw the sampling there of some of our experts. I want to thank you all for joining us today on Insight to Impact. And thank you to everyone on the panel. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thanks, yeah.